Hello world, I'm Doug Johnson, and this is White Trash Talking. So today I wanted to look at the budget cuts that are underway in the U.S. by Trump and by the new Department for Government Efficiency, DOGE, or DOGE. Critics argue, rightly, that these cuts are illegal and unconstitutional, and that Trump, in bypassing Congress, is assuming authoritarian or oligarchic power along with his fellow billionaires. Half of the country is apoplectic about Trump's first month in office, while the other half is celebrating, seemingly unaware of what's coming. While this rise of oligarchy is real, I will present the view that we, the people, all had a hand in this through apathy, ignorance, or indifference as our democratic structures slowly withered before our eyes, while corporations captured our democratic institutions in what John Ralston Saul calls, quote, a corporate coup d'etat in slow motion, end quote. And that this coup, now nearly complete, has opened the door to clownish buffoons like Trump and even worse. I rely heavily today on writer Chris Hedges for context in understanding the swift, sweeping changes that are happening now. But before we consider Hedges' perspective, let's look at the reaction to the budget cuts by House and Senate members Chuck Schumer and Ilhan Omar.
Last night, President Trump plunged the country into chaos, a cruel, nasty, and illegal chaos. Without a shred of warning, the Trump administration announced a halt to virtually all federal grants and loans across the country. In an instant, with no precedent, no justification, no legal grounds, Donald Trump has shut off billions, perhaps trillions of dollars that help American families every single day. It's cruel. It's reckless. And this money supports states and cities, school boards, hospitals, small businesses, families, firefighters, police officers, fighting fentanyl. So many things just, boom, cut. Law enforcement, aid to the elderly, support for veterans. This decision is lawless, it's destructive, it's dangerous, it's cruel, it's illegal, and it's unconstitutional.
Okay, I agree with everything that Chuck Schumer says, but I think it's a bit rich coming from him, a Democrat. The Democrats have been in lockstep with the Republican Party for many, many years, as both parties have agreed to send billions and even trillions of dollars overseas to countries like Afghanistan, Ukraine, Israel, and so on. This money should have been allocated to the American people, but because of people like Chuck Schumer and others, it wasn't. And now we're facing the crisis that we are. But let's continue.
We are witnessing a constitutional crisis. We talked about Trump wanting to be a dictator on day one, and here we are. This is what the beginning of dictatorship looks like. When you gut the Constitution and you install yourself as the sole power, we get to decide. We have the power of the purse. We get to decide where money is allocated, and it's the executive's power to make sure that that money gets to where it needs to get.
What's forgotten in all of this is the people power. And she's right that Congress and the Senate have these powers, but she doesn't mention the people here. And the people lost their power. Now what goes around comes around, okay? All right, now I want to play a clip of Chris Hedges being interviewed by Frank Barat. Chris Hedges was a war correspondent for many years with the New York Times and now writes independently on the Chris Hedges Report. I will post a link to this entire Frank Barat interview in the comments. Here's what Chris Hedges says about the new U.S. oligarchy and what they're up to and the conditions which facilitated its rise.
I would say the entire billionaire class is dangerous. Elon Musk is kind of the tip of the spear. They will turbocharge what has already been happening under both Democratic and Republican administrations. That's the stripping away of social services, austerity measures, Social Security being the big one, the deregulation, further deregulation of this horrendous for-profit healthcare system. Musk is part of this oligarchic class. I mean, the election between Biden and Trump was really a battle between corporate and oligarchic power. They're very different. Corporate power wants a kind of stability. It makes investments in places like China, Vietnam, Mexico. Sometimes it'll take a year, maybe longer, for their investments to begin to pay back. They want that decorum that an Obama or a Biden offers. Oligarchic power is different. Oligarchic power is about chaos. It's about destruction. It's because oligarchic power makes its money primarily off of rentier economics by setting up toll booths to basic necessities. Oligarchic power wants the deconstruction of the administrative state, to quote Steve Bannon, because that's how they make their money, whether that's through private security. Everything becomes privatized. Education, that's why you're hearing Trump talking about destroying the Department of Education. Education becomes privatized. And that's what the election was really at its core about, and the oligarchs won.
Okay, this is a new way of looking at it for me, and that's why I value Chris Hedges so much. He's able to contextualize and have you see it maybe a little bit deeper, and it helps me understand a little bit more about the power struggles that are underway, and the light comes on a little bit for me anyway. I've been a follower of Chris Hedges for many years, subscribes to his newsletter, and read his books and so on. So I'm a big fan of him. But let's continue.
And Trump is surrounded. He himself is an oligarch. He's surrounded by oligarchs, and Musk, of course, is perhaps the most public face. But it's a group of people who are now going to rip the guts out of what's left of our very anemic democracy and our all of the programs that essentially address social concerns and social needs. Sheldon Wolin called our system of governance inverted totalitarianism, by which he meant that all the iconography, language, and symbols of the old state were there, but internally corporations and oligarchs have seized the levers of power. I think what we're seeing now is a transformation into a more classical form of authoritarianism or totalitarianism built around the cultish figure of Donald Trump. This is the inevitable society in deep decay, and it was a long time coming, but it certainly didn't begin with Trump.
It's important to understand this point, that it didn't begin with Trump and it was a long time in coming. Half the U.S. blames the other half for Trump's election, but we're missing the point that the rise of a demagogue is inevitable when democratic institutions atrophy. All the money for health care, free education, a living wage, and much more has gone to fund wars abroad that enrich the elite and the military-industrial complex. The people stand by impotently as the U.S. funds genocide in Gaza and sends billions after billions to Israel, Ukraine, and elsewhere. The people have no say whatsoever in foreign policy and only have a token influence on domestic policies. We all let this happen. It's happening on our watch. Here, Hedges explains the corporate takeover that has been underway for some time.
The expanding social inequality, the seizure of power by corporations and the oligarchic class, which have deformed and destroyed democratic institutions, and I would include the Democratic Party in that, but also the media, academia, the Congress. Our electoral system is just a form of legalized bribery, the decimation of labor unions, the stacking of the courts, not just by Trump with these Christian fascists, but by all administrations with these corporatists who owe their loyalty to this ideology of neoliberalism. This was a long time coming. And Trump is not the disease, he's the symptom. He's what is vomited up out of the morass. It was completely predictable. You can't carry out this kind of corporate coup d'etat in slow motion and not have severe consequences. It's a very dangerous moment. But I would say that it's not so much that Trump will slay democracy. It's more that we've lost the veneer that masks the corruption within the ruling class, and their pretense of democracy is gone. The loss of basic democratic norms began long before Trump.
Yeah, Sheldon Wollin's idea of inverted totalitarianism is that over time, as corporations captured our democratic institutions, our representatives increasingly ignored the people's needs as they embraced their financial backers. By outward appearances, the remnants of democratic structures remained in place, along with what Hedges calls their, quote, iconography, language, and symbols, end quote, but they no longer serve the people. Now, as the pretense of democracy is gone, as Hedges says, the people have largely become obsolete. I believe the same fate will befall the House and Senate, two empty, useless symbols of our former democracy, as the new oligarchs rule by decree and override the checks and balances. I suspect that Schumer and Omar, who spoke in the beginning, as they railed against the Trump insurgency, recognized their impending obsolescence. So where and when did this corporate coup d'etat in slow motion begin? I can't point to the precise beginning, but I can point to Ronald Reagan's presidency. Here's an excerpt from a speech Reagan gave in 1981, 1 month after taking office. It's strikingly similar to what's happening today.
It's time to try something different. And that's what we're going to do. I've already placed a freeze on hiring replacements for those who retire or leave government service. I put a freeze on pending regulations and set up a task force under Vice President Bush to review regulations with an eye toward getting rid of as many as possible. I have decontrolled oil, which should result in more domestic production and less dependence on foreign oil. But it will take more, much more. On February 18th, I will present in detail an economic program to Congress embodying the features I've just stated. It will propose budget cuts in virtually every department of government. It is my belief that these actual budget cuts will only be part of the savings. As our cabinet secretaries take charge of the departments, they will search out areas of waste, extravagance, and costly administrative overhead which could yield additional and substantial reductions.
Reagan not only cut the programs he mentioned, but he also cut the tax rate for the upper class substantially, by about 2/3. While taking from the poor, he was giving to the rich, to corporations and the elite. He couched this transfer of wealth in pseudo-economic terms on something he called the, quote, trickle-down theory. The idea being that if corporations had more money, they would create more jobs and pay higher salaries, so the wealth would trickle down to the middle and working classes. But instead, corporations used the money to buy back stock, which caused the price of stocks to rise. This caused a stock market boom that enriched the wealthy and greatly widened the income gap. While the people struggled with fewer good-paying jobs, programs, and safety nets, corporate power increased, granting them greater influence in government, resulting in favorable tax codes and fewer regulations that protect the people. Over time, the gap widened, and corporate influence in government steadily increased. Now, I will add one caveat that Reagan proposed these cuts to Congress while Trump is not doing so. He's overriding Congress. But I will argue that this is the evolution of this waning democracy. Okay, so now listen to Reagan speaking at a Republican Party function about his true motivations.
Those of us who call ourselves conservative have pointed out what's wrong with government policy for more than a quarter of a century. Now we have an opportunity to make policy, and to change our national direction. All of us, in government, in the House, in the Senate, in the executive branch, and in private life, can now stand together. We can stop the drain on the economy by the public sector.
I have to stop there. We can stop the drain on the economy by the public sector. Think about what that means. We can stop the drain in the economy by the public sector. We, the people, are the public sector. We pay taxes for programs and safety nets. We pay the taxes for our welfare. That's the purpose of taxation. And we waged a revolution against the British, saying no taxation without representation. Well, we've lost that representation. You can see him speaking about it now. Let's listen to that part again.
We can stop the drain on the economy by the public sector. We can stop the drain on the economy by the public sector.
Amazing. This should be ringing in our ears. This is the mantra that is alive today. And it's something in Trump's mind. It's in Elon Musk's mind. They want to stop the drain of the economy by the public sector, and they're cutting public programs. Our government believes that money going to the people is money down the drain. Presumably, we, the people, are bottom dwellers, not deserving of our own tax dollars. Politicians court us with lies when they want our vote and afterwards consign us to the gutter as useless serfs. Very soon, they won't even need our vote, and they can flush us away for good. To resist this fate, we must come together and start building community. We must stop blaming each other. We must admit that we were all taken in by this facade of democracy and the illusion that a new president will make things better. If we look honestly at the long succession of presidents, it's clear that they were merely fronts or masks controlled from above by the levers of the elite. The mask changed, but the systemic rot persisted. Now the mask has come off. We see the rot clear as day. It's Donald Trump. Okay, if you like what I've said, please give it a like. Please subscribe. I post every week. I'll see you next week. Thank you very much. Bye.